button. So if you need that, it's rolling along the bottom, and I'm not going to look at it because it will distract me. So I just want to clear up one thing about the blurb. We kind of rushed to get the blurb out so everyone could sign up for this before we had fine-tuned it. So this is not so much about limiting distraction as structuring the class to encourage engagement. If you are interested in attentional distraction kinds of things, I can recommend a podcast called T for Teaching. And at the end of my slides, I have that as one of the resources. And they do have an excellent episode by Jim Lang, about distraction on October 21st. So go back and listen to that one. He'll give you some ideas like asking yourself, when do my students get distracted in my lecture? And what things have I noticed that engages them? So that can be your takeaway on that. Okay, I'm going to use PowerPoint because I'm a psychology and neuroscience professor, and I use PowerPoint to help me stay focused and not forget to tell people things. And then also I upload all those slides so that they can use them to study for tests and all those things. So just a few things about me. I'm a visiting assistant professor of psychology. Some years I also straddle psychology and neuroscience at Pomona. I've actually been here for about 9 years at this point. I did my undergraduate work at Yale, and then I worked for a couple of years at NIH, and then I did a clinical psychology PhD at the University of Arizona. And my clinical specialty is neuropsychology. So that's where the neuroscience comes in. I also do a private practice, well, not so much private practice, but a clinical practice at Casa Colina, working with people with brain injury. So happy to talk to anyone about any of that, but I know sometimes it helps to know what people's disciplines are because we all approach teaching a little bit differently. So I'll give you an example from one of my classes, and then hopefully when we have our group discussion, you guys can share examples from your classes too. So again, this is on increasing student engagement, and this is based on an article that I read in the Chronicle of Higher Education that Jim Lang wrote. And so I've put that reference at the end. He referred to a workshop that Michelle Lemons, also from Assumption University, had led about the 5E model of student learning. And so I reached out to both Jim and Michelle, and they shared some materials with me. And then Michelle revealed that she got the idea from her workshop from Kim Tanner, who has also written an article about the 5E model. And so that's also shared at the end. So a big hands up, heads up, round of applause for those three people who gave me the idea and provide support. And that's why we're here today. So my goal for today's workshop is to provide you with tools and a rationale for increased student engagement and learning in class. And in order to do that, we're going to explore and use the order of engagement concept, again called the 5E model. And then we're going to spend some time reflecting on teaching tools that you currently use and share those ideas with each other. And hopefully at the end, we'll have a great set of tools that we can use and also a better understanding of when and how to use those to promote student engagement. In order to also apply things that I've learned in previous CTL workshops or faculty meetings, we're going to be using a couple of tools ourselves during this workshop. One is Google Documents. So if you're not on a computer, that might be easier for you, or maybe you have an iPad with a Google Drive, that's fine. And at the end, I'm going to use Mentimeter, which is an app you can put on your phone, but you can also access the website. Okay, so to start off, I'm going to give you a couple minutes just to quietly think to yourself about a class that maybe didn't go well, or a class that is typical and what you would do. So I usually have sort of a tool bag of things that I pull out to do during class. And think specifically about what components you use. And then as I've warned you, at some point, we're going to write those down on pieces of paper. But for right now, you have just a minute to think quietly to yourself. So let's keep moving. We're going to come back and use that as a tool, but I want to highlight one of the 5 E's from the model, which is engagement. And so one of the concepts of the model is to start off with some kind of question or activity that will help people start to think about what you're going to be going through in that lesson, right? So obviously, the main point of this workshop is to think about how we use these pieces of our lessons or our tools. And so I want you to kind of prime the pump by starting to think about that at the top of the hour, as well as trying to give you a roadmap. Because another thing that is true of many of the things that I've seen about teaching and learning is that the students do best when they know what to expect. So you kind of tell them what's going to be coming, and that kind of helps them mentally prepare and also organizationally follow along. Okay, so what is the 5E model? Oh, and just a little note in chat, I already put the Google link in for later, because sometimes later I have to look around for where my links are. So I try to put those in chat at the beginning of the hour so that I can easily copy and paste them. So the 5E model originally came from the National Research Council in 1999, and that reference is at the end. But then there's this nice, like 6-page article that Kim Tanner wrote about order matters and using the 5E model to align teaching. And so I definitely recommend reading that if you have even 10 minutes. She's very clear about what's in each part of the model. She gives examples of what people can do during those parts, which we're going to also work on together. And she gives examples of questions that instructors have. So the main idea behind this is that we often maybe have been taught, and probably depends what generation you are and when you went to graduate school, but when I was in college, it was the professor got up there, they lectured, we took notes, that was it. That was class, right? And so we've been talking a lot about more active engagement, how to get students actively participating in class, involved in their learning, not zoning out, drifting off, turning off their cameras, going to sleep. You've seen the drill this semester and last semester. And so if you actually pay attention to the order of learning, there are ways to improve their engagement by doing your pieces, your lesson at different times. So rather than just kind of, well, what I want to get across is this information. And so I'm going to start lecturing, and then I'm going to show a video, and then I'm going to lecture some more, and then I'll give them a quiz. To actually think a little bit more about how each thing that you might do during that time period, and it can be a lab or a lecture or anything, would tie into what we know about how people learn. So the first stage is to engage them. And that is to invite interest, right? That is to kind of pique their interest. It's kind of like the hook in an article, the first 3 pages of a novel that make you decide if you want to read it or put it down. And to also think about prior knowledge, right? So for most courses, we're either building on previous knowledge, or we're trying to create associations in their brain between new learning and old learning. So getting them to engage in the material either before the session or right at the top of the lecture or the session helps get them ready to learn. You can also incorporate the question like, why do I need to know this? Right. So tying in, a lot of this is taught in STEM topics. So Kim's written other presentations about sort of biological concepts and saying, why do I need to learn about the double helix at this point in the course or for this hour? Okay, so just figuring out ways to really get them interested and ready to participate, like right off the top. Explore is to identify current concepts. And this is even more setting the stage for the explanation. So when we think of typical teaching, you might think of, again, like a lecture or a video. That would be the explanation of the information that we want them to master, or the content. Exploring helps them start to grapple with what they don't know, or think about what information they need to understand, or start to attempt to understand the material. So it's an activity that helps them sort of figure out what they don't know and what confuses them. And it gets them ready to kind of gets their brain fired up and ready to absorb the information you're about to give them. So by kind of figuring out what they don't know about the material, or giving them some kind of problem to figure out, and as they wrestle with it, they'll recognize that there are some gaps to their understanding, right? Then they're ready for the information that you're going to give them. I think the explanation is pretty straightforward. I don't know everyone's background that's here right now, but assuming that you do some kind of instruction or engagement, you might think that you know what this is. I will add the caveat that the explanation phase should include active participation, right? So whether it's I'm lecturing and they're taking notes, or I'm lecturing and then I ask them to explain back to me what they heard, or explain it to somebody else, or I throw a question out there and they have to answer it, there still should be some active engagement during the explanation part of this, okay? And then elaboration is trying out new knowledge, mastering content, or what I tend to think about as the apply part. So often in my slides, I'll have a slide that just says apply, and it will have a concept that we've been talking about and some way that I want them to engage with that material. For online and remote situations, I often have the elaborate be something that they work on together in a group, or off on a different screen, or in a breakout room. But if you're teaching math, science, something like that, it could be a problem set, it could be some kind of activity that they need to apply what you've just explained to them. And then evaluate could be the traditional test or quiz, or writing a paper, some way that they're demonstrating the knowledge that you want them to master, the content. But we can get more creative with that too. Okay. So this is kind of a little more informally giving you an idea of the different concepts that we've gone through. So engage, again, getting them thinking, activating their interest, asking the question, why do I need to know this? Explore is connecting to old learning, but also grappling with new information. Explain is where we're going to do our knowledge jump. Elaborate gives them the chance to apply or practice. And then evaluate. Not only can they demonstrate what they know, but this is also a great time for them to give you feedback about what was difficult for them to learn, things that you might need to go back and explain again, or think times for them to practice maybe quiz questions or test questions in advance of the actual test that you're going to give, right? So this evaluate can be used in lots of different ways. Does anyone have any questions or comments at this point? Because I'm going to start making this more interactive. I've already lectured and I'm going to lecture again this afternoon. So I don't want to give you guys a lecture, but does anyone have any questions on these 5 E's? Okay, so I want to give you an example. I was thinking about preparing this presentation last week at the same time that I was preparing some of my lectures. And so in my introduction to psych science class, one of our lectures was about learning about parts of the brain and the neuron. And so I actually wrote down, it's handy to have a camera because I wrote down these little slips of paper and tried to figure out which E they corresponded to. And then I actually physically rearranged them into an order. And that's what I'm going to be having you to do. So in this particular lecture, the components that I came up with were a poll that I had set up in Zoom that had to do with labeling the parts of a neuron, a really quick experiment that I do with them. And then I've been trying to break my lectures or my Zoom meetings into activities and lectures and activities and lectures so that they never have more than, okay, it was going to be 10 to 15 minutes. Realistically, it's often like a 20-minute lecture, and then we break up to do something else. And that's based on a high flex model that's also in my references. So the lectures and a video I had about Phineas Gage, go Phineas Gage, were some more things that I had. And then a breakout room. Because it was only like the second week of classes, I included an icebreaker time in that breakout room so they could get to know each other. And then I usually have them do some kind of chat. It occurred to me actually when I was doing this that my poll could be used in multiple places. So it could be part of engage at the beginning, but it could also be part of evaluate at the end. And so when you start thinking about your components, be open to the concept that they could work in different places, right? They could work in multiple places. So how I ended up using it was I started class with announcements and stuff, and then a poll of could they label the neuron accurately? And there were probably 4 or 5 people who were inaccurate. So that also gave me information like, this is something I need to explain a little bit further. They don't already know it. Then I had them do a quick experiment that had them think through the processing that was going on in the brain when they were making a response to something I was asking them to do. And so I thought of that somewhat as the exploration. So they were trying to grapple or grasp the concept of localized processing in the brain and maybe a little bit of where some of that occurs. So auditory processing and visual processing and things like that. And hopefully realizing that they didn't already know everything about it. And then I did a mini lecture. Then I sent them to a breakout room with some more questions about the brain, as well as I think I asked them to swap some kind of stories with each other. That came from a great website that Pomona students put together for icebreakers, also on my reference slide. Then I did another mini lecture and showed them the Phineas Gage video and had them kind of react to that and talk about that. So again, participation. And then I had them type in chat, like, what was the muddiest part of today? What are you still confused about? And I printed those questions off and brought those back the next time to answer them. And then I figured I could also throw the poll back up there of the parts of the neuron and see if this time everyone was able to correctly answer that. So that's how I use the parts of that particular class. Not every class is going to have all these components. And I think that's another helpful thing that Kim Tanner says in her article is that, the expectation isn't that you're necessarily going to be able to do all 5 parts in every single class, but maybe you can add 1 or 2 to a class that you weren't doing before. And I think as psychologists, I think it's really important that we give ourselves permission to not be perfect at this remote learning stuff. So. Okay, so now it's your turn. See, that didn't even take that long, which is good because, again, I don't like just talking at people. So having started to think about a class that didn't go well, or again, your typical class and what you usually would do, lecture, poll, whatever, I'm going to give you some time to write those out on pieces of paper and start to think about which of each of those lesson pieces would go with the 5E model, and why, right? Like, why is this an elaboration versus an explanation? Why is this engagement versus evaluation? And then kind of rearrange them and think, if I do this earlier, is it going to engage them more? Or should I evaluate them in the middle of class? And then when they don't know something, then I can teach them about that and then reevaluate. So I'm going to give you some time to do that. And then depending on how many people we actually have here, we might go into breakout room to discuss, or we might all just stay together. Okay. If I'm going to put the previous slide back up so that you guys can see the 5 E's again. But if you can use the raise hand function when you're all done, then that will tell me who still needs some time. Okay. So I think this is the easier way to see it. Sorry, I was muted. If anyone came late and has questions, just chat with me and I'll try to explain some more things. We'll take about 2 more minutes. I think about half the people are ready. Okay. So just one thing I want to point out about that is I read another article, probably from Chronicle of Higher Ed, that pointed out that it's okay to have silent time during classes where you allow people to work on things. And so one thing I'm trying to do more in some of my smaller, like almost discussion-based classes, maybe having people work on a document first. Like I give them some discussion questions, let them kind of quietly type in some of their thoughts, and then we discuss. So it's almost a pair and share, but that's a little harder to do in Zoom. Okay, so I think since we have 6 of you plus Jessica and I will go ahead and do 2 breakout rooms of 3, and then I can visit both of them. So I'd like you to introduce yourself and your discipline. If we have people who are not instructors at all, maybe let me know in a chat so that I can make sure you're not all in the same group. Share your note cards and which E you think they match. And then think about, could that lesson or piece of activity be switched to a different E? What order would best facilitate student engagement and learning? And this is a good opportunity to also talk about like what things seem to work well in your class and what don't, because I think the value of these workshops for me has mostly been talking to other instructors. No offense, Jessica. And finding out what has worked for them. And then maybe even get an idea of something else that could be added and how else you keep your students engaged. And then to throw things at you that you may or may not have done before in your classes, I'm going to ask everyone during or after discussion to add your ideas to a shared Google document. Again, that's in chat, so you'll want to get to that location before I send you to a breakout room, although I can rebroadcast it if needed. And remember, you don't have to have all 5 E's in every class. So let's do that for a little bit. And on the Google document that I've shared, I put some examples already for each of the different sections, just kind of get the ball rolling. So if you want to add on to those, you can, or add new ones, that's also fine. Yeah, engaging examples. So keep in mind with engage that it can be pre-class activities too. So it could be, readings that you have them do ahead of time, but they have to answer some questions on them, or a quiz that they do before they get there, or writing some kind of very short reaction paper or piece they have to do research on, anything that kind of gets them ready to learn. So one thing I had my students do in intro psych was read about learning in college on a couple different articles and talk about I asked them sort of like what was the muddiest piece of that, and then also organizationally what they had taken away from how they could help themselves stay more organized with all these different pieces of information. And the muddiest part for a lot of them was this idea that they should do the chapter review questions before reading the chapter. A lot of them said, like, I'm not sure why I would do that. I don't know the information yet. How would I know that? I haven't read the chapter. And so actually, I think of that as an engagement piece. And I had to explicitly sort of explain to them that by trying to do those questions before doing the reading, it helped their brain see what they didn't already know and kind of look for the answers to those as they were doing it. So I think there's, lots of different ways to engage them in between classes, before they start a session, or at the beginning of the session. Okay, so you guys can put your hands down. I'm going to do random breakout rooms. Okay, so the rooms are open. Jessica, you can go to a room or hang out with me.
So great, useful.
Thank you. And people send out those breakout room messages and I'm like, I can barely read that. It's so tiny. All right, so that in mind, if you didn't see my message, please do contribute to the group Google Doc about ideas that you have. I saw somebody pasted a whole thing at the end about having people answer questions or ask questions, teaching students to ask questions. That's very helpful. And I think Suzanne maybe had something, was it different, Suzanne, that you wanted to share with everyone? No, I can't
I
hear
don't
you.
know if I could send it through. I think. Let me see. Let me see if I could share screen. I'm not able to share my screen. Um,
Here, I just enabled you to. But again, also, if you want to send it to Jessica, we'll be putting together some things to email everyone after this.
Okay, this is something that I haven't had time to go into more detail. I just saw this. Our school sent this out. Our faculty. Helping the faculty, or the person who's gonna, our new liaison type person has sent this out, and she's really great. But I just hadn't had time to think about this, and it's, teaching students to ask questions.
Okay.
And I tried to send this out, but I don't know.
So you've added this to the Google Doc already, right?
No, I can though. I was gonna append it, but I wasn't sure if that was something that, you know.
Yeah, that would be fine. And yeah, so after this session, I'll make sure Jessica has my slides and then also the Google Doc link. So you
Okay.
guys can go back and
Okay.
look at everything that we've put together. So it's
Okay.
meant to be a living document. And somebody had put teaching students to ask questions on that Google Doc. So maybe it's the same thing.
I'm gonna stop share then and just append this to the Google Doc.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so then the last thing that I had for us to do was to wrap up with the evaluation piece, and give Jessica a little bit of time if she wanted to. So let me share that. Okay, so another tool we were talking about in one of the groups, Padlet. So if somebody didn't add Padlet to our elaboration tools, that would be great if you do so. And I mentioned also Mentimeter, which somebody had mentioned in a different meeting that I was in. So I've only played with it a little bit, but if you go to this link, which I'll put in chat, or if you have the Mentimeter app like on your phone or iPad, you can just put in this code. Let me find the chat and put that in. Then this is one way to add some information about what you thought about this. So let me show you what that looks like. Gotta find it. Okay. Are you guys seeing the Mentimeter slide?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so if you go to that menti.com with our code or enter the code 5855017, you should be able to add a little blurb or bubble about what you will take away from today's workshop. And then after that, I'll have you also do something in chat that's similar. And there's no right answers here. It could be like, hey, I met somebody else from a different college and learned this great idea. So some of you might be typing, which is fine. This is just like another way to kind of do an evaluation. It's kind of nice because students can throw an idea up there or do something sort of a communal way where they can see each other's feedback. I've used something similar to this with the Post-it notes to talk about what things worked and aren't working in remote learnings or things that they fear in remote learning. So it's a nice chance to give you the instructor feedback and also for them to see what, you could ask any kind of question like what confused you the most today, and that could create a sense of community as well. You can also, on the free version, you can create, I think, 5 quiz slides, which could be, actually asking a question about content that they should have learned, or 2 slides that are more like this, where they're kind of more open-ended. And then go back to the PowerPoint. And then the other thing I like to do a lot in chat is just have people comment on like the muddiest aspect of the class, like a question they still have. In this case, it could be a topic you want to learn more about from CTL, because Jessica will see that. Something that confused you, like what did elaborate mean? Something that went well. And then, those, I typically encourage those to be open to everyone so they can all see, but of course people can send me a direct message as the professor if they have something that they're really confused about and they're too embarrassed to share that with everyone else. But we spent a lot of time talking about the community. Like I know one of our groups was talking about how to get people to keep their cameras on. I never require that because there could be people who don't have the bandwidth or they have privacy issues. But I do talk about that being the semester, like why would we want to have the cameras on? What does that do for us as a community? How does that help me as a teacher? Not only to not just be talking to my computer, but also to see like maybe if you're a little confused or if you're getting really bored and I need to engage you some more. And so the same thing with chat. We can talk about like, why would you want to share your confusion with everyone? And it's okay to not know all the answers. That's good feedback for me. Maybe lots of people have the same question and that will give me a chance to explain that to you next time. Or do an activity so you can grasp and grapple with it yourself. So I think that's pretty much all I had. I'll give you a few minutes to get those chats in, and then Jessica can take over. The last screen, again, these will be sent out to you, but this is the Chronicle article that gave me this idea. The original 5 E's came from the National Research Council, and then this is that nice short article about how to do this even better than I've explained it today. T for Teaching podcasts, maybe you want to listen to that while you're going for your walks outside because the gym's closed. This high flex course design has lots of great ways to break down your class into different activities. And these are the icebreakers, Zoom icebreakers specifically from Pomona students that you can use if you throw students into breakout rooms at the beginning of the semester. Still, it's a good time for them to get to know each other. So thank you all so much for giving me your precious time, which is your most precious commodity in a semester, and letting me try to share some ideas with you. And I'm happy to, I don't think I have expertise to answer a lot of questions, but I'm happy to answer questions, chat with you. You can email me. I'll make sure that you have my email. Well, you should have it from last week. And Jessica, do you want to tell us about upcoming stuff in the CTL?
Yes, thank you so much. That was just fantastic. And I can tell that people had great conversations in their breakout rooms based on what they're saying, based on the Google Doc. That's really remarkable. Thank you so much for this for today. I'm going to stop our recording.